This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with us is your other hosts, Fetch and Puka. Say hi, Fetch and Puka.
Hello, good to be here.
I was going to say hi, Fetch and Puka, but, you know.
What are we talking about today?
Well, we've got a little project brewing, and I feel like I need to give some clarity. I've been harping on the Changeling 30th anniversary project for a while, and the best laid plans of Puka and Men is that things don't always go according to plan. It is still happening. It may not be the full scope of what we had originally envisioned, but today we are talking about one book which is at least getting closer to completion, the Book of Gremayre.
You say brewing, but we've already released the cookbook.
That is true. Yes.
I will point out that the I'm pretty sure the Kickstarter for C20 came out in the 21st anniversary year. The Kickstarter, not even the book.
Wow.
Isn't it? So I think we're still okay. Like we're working on it. But
I know.
if something comes out next year or something, that's okay. It can still be under C30.
Everybody's still waiting for Demon the Fallen 20th anniversary.
Let them wait.
Hey, that could have been a book you liked, Puka. We don't know in that hypothetical of the universe.
I will say, at this point, I think the statute of limitations on my bitterness has passed sufficiently that I could read through the core book.
Yep.
But I'm not. I mean, I've got other things going on. I'm not in a rush or anything.
So today, in our review of Demon the Fallen, we're going to be talking about...
Yes.
Well, that will be an important topic that we'll get to, but maybe we should start with the broad strokes.
So what are the broad strokes?
Well, I guess the question is why the Book of Gremayre? I mean, that's the big one.
Yeah, what's a Gremayre? Explain this concept. Are we even pronouncing this word correctly?
I think it's pronounced grammar.
Yeah, exactly.
Gremayre?
So the origin of the word actually comes from the French grammaire, which means grammar, and ultimately from Latin and the Greek meaning just letters. And the reason that it ended up being applied to magic is, if I'm remembering correctly, this notion that written texts hold power. If you're illiterate and you see someone with a book, it's like, what kind of magic can they work? And that sort of tradition. It's also, I believe, where the word grimoire comes from through a couple sound changes. So that's the ultimate origin. Yep. I believe the spelling that we see in Changeling is influenced by Scots. And then it worked its way into English. You also see it as grammari sometimes.
Yeah, and this is not unusual. Spells, like spelling. There seems like a lot of writing is magic.
Writing is magic. Words are magic. Language.
Speaking of magic, since we're talking about how the name of it came to be, I think this is a good time to point out fundamentally that the Gremayre ability is a surprisingly utilitarian ability in Changeling the Dreaming compared to its equivalents in Mage or Werewolf, where you'll separate occult and rituals and a dozen other things. Gremayre covers any kind of supernatural lore under one umbrella. It's impressive.
It is similar, I think, to Vampire's occult ability. Like, it's almost the same ability, especially in C20. Previous editions, it was a bit more specific to Changeling things, and they've kind of expanded it.
Did they?
First edition, it was a background, if you remember.
Oh, yeah, but they had myth lore. They had But Greymare, the background was just past lives.
Yeah, it was remembrance.
Myth lore was just Greymare. They
swapped
moved things around.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Changeling, the way that I think of it is almost just like glamour theory. I mean, it is a knowledge, it is kind of in that umbrella. And in terms of how it applies to things like prodigals, if you think about how Changelings frame the lore of other supernaturals in their own terms through the lens of the dreaming, then you can extend that sort of metaphysical knowledge from their perspective to other groups in the game.
Yeah. I do like to think of it though as just also like the old one ability to like is, I mean, it might be different for knockers or something, some knockers or something, but I think of it as like the knowledge it provides, yes, is that, but like it's through lots of knowing lots and lots and lots of stories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about this in part because before I started working on this project, I did not realize that changing magic was more than just somebody told me about this crazy concept called jumping really far with Wayfair, and I studied how to jump really well and learned how to put on those cool looking boots in order to make it go easier. No, it turns out it's a whole sorceress discipline, which says a lot. So how much of this like sorcery aspect do you feel there is that's part of Changeling? I personally don't feel like that gets talked about enough in the book itself.
Can I just say, as an aside, I had a dream the other night with someone hopscotching, and like I knew within the dream that it was the hopscotch cantrip. So anyway,
Because
uh,
like magic, there's the arts and realms, and the arts, especially in C20, are more than cantrips. But there's also knowledge of like the oaths. Oath crafting is sort of under it. Talking about sorceries, that's sort of a thing. I don't know how much. Yeah, we'll get into that later. But
Yeah.
there is all sorts of aspects of changeling magic that are not about arts and realms as well. So there's like crafting chimera. There's knowing tricks of the dreaming.
Exactly. I was about to say the very idea of manipulating the dreaming and understanding how to get it to do
Yeah.
what you want is the foundation for so much of what changeling magic is. And I find that
Mhm.
really cool.
And I think you're also pointing to an extent to the issue that a lot of this is unarticulated in the books or unspecified. Like it'll get mentioned as a thing that happens, but there's no system or details. So that was part of the genesis of this book.
Yeah.
The other part, as veterans may remember, or as listeners may remember from our minisode on the topic, there was going to be a book at the end of second edition called Book of Glamour, which, to my knowledge, was significantly written. Like a large chunk of it was written, and it currently exists in some kind of legal limbo where it is actually not permitted to release any of the
Aw.
text. We have scraps of it that have come out. There's the Daedalon art, which we talked about in that minisode. I'm still of the opinion that some of the rules probably percolated into C20 because some of the same people were working on it. Like I imagine Unleashings might have been in there. But yeah, so it always just kind of seemed like this lacuna in the canon of details about the magic. Every other game, I think, gets some level of detail about, well, maybe not Wraith, but, so it seems like Changelings should have
Well,
that too.
even Wraith gets alternate arcanoi. So
Yeah, but to my knowledge, there's no like deep dive into the metaphysics of how arcanoi work.
that's true, I guess. Yeah, maybe. And we find out Wraith there is, but some
They,
weird
they
book.
they talk about it as a intuitive understanding of, oh gosh, it's been so long. I think it's the intuitive understanding of what fundamentally makes up a wraith's existence because they're made purely out of emotion, and then learning how to manipulate that in ways that interact with the world is the foundation of going from the intuitive stuff to being what the guilds teach you.
Is there a book length treatment of variations on this topic?
No, there in fact is not. There are not even merits and flaws for Wraith 20, which is very sad.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that would have been great if there's like a secret like alternate guild in Wraith. Anyway, we're not doing alternate Wraith. Never mind. That's another podcast. Maybe our like 8th season we'll look at that.
So what about Vampire and its 50 different thaumaturgical disciplines?
Right. Well, that's the thing that just going into this, I think one of the challenges was to not turn it into vampires. Like, yeah, everybody gets their own blood magic. All of those have 10 paths and 15 rituals, like all of that. Because the tension, I think, is between creating systems that players will want to use and creating narratives that fit within the world of the game. So like when we did the sorcerers episode, we had the question of, can changelings do hedge magic? Should they be allowed to do hedge magic? And there's kind of a few different ways you can go with that. I think it is important to make the systems make sense within the setting of the game.
Yep.
And yeah.
There's also game questions like vampire disciplines, when you're not talking about thaumaturgy, most of them, are a very sort of limited scope.
Yeah.
Changeling arts and realms with unleashing and all that, and that's much broader. So, we wouldn't want to just create things that are almost arts and realms but not. That would be, and not great from us.
Isn't it? I don't know how this works in terms of math, but is it each cantrip theoretically has 500 variations?
What?
How many realms are there?
Oh my god.
Well, so there's 20 base realms times 5 scene times 5 time, right?
Yeah, okay.
So there's a lot. And, as much as we can talk about Changeling being a fixed system, the cantrips being a fixed system, there is still a lot more variation than you get with disciplines or gifts or Arcanoi.
And things like Fey 5 really stretch it, and but you can, because you can target cantrips with cantrips and then use time triggers, and I think it might be Turing complete, but I'm not sure. I think you might be able to technically make a computer out of magic.
Even before we get to the Fey 5, I was struck early on by how flexible the system was. I compared it to Mage 20. I won both games, and I thought, I don't know. It kind of feels like Changelings can do everything that mages want to do, and easier and faster.
And more.
I put it like, comparing the two, it's closer probably to Ars Magica or something like that. But the variations, like the scope, it's a little bit more limited in Changeling still, in theory, but you can buy everything way cheaper. So I don't know how that...
And you also don't have to work in paradigms, let's not forget. So you have...
Yeah. Oh, well, that gets into a whole Anyway, this is not Mage the podcast.
Yeah, save it for the crossover episode.
Yeah.
Oh, should we do a crossover episode on Fey versus mortal magic?
Is Mage magic mortal magic?
Okay, later thoughts. Anyway.
Yeah.
So I hear we're working on a book.
Yeah. So maybe we should talk about a couple of things that are in the book, and maybe a couple of things that aren't.
Yeah, I wanted to put it first, as we said, it's like doing like little hooks and stuff that are throughout the books. There is no way... scope creep is an issue with this, and there's no way we can do every single hook ever mentioned in one book, because that would be... Speaking of Mage 20, would be bigger than the Mage 20 core book. So you can't do all the hooks. That would take... We'd never be done. We'd just be making more hooks. But...
That way lies madness.
The Storyteller Vault is open for anybody, so if you want to make more hooks that we don't cover... Anyway, I just want to get that up front.
Yes. So yeah, I made a little list. I'm happy to talk about whichever, or if other people want to talk about whichever, but...
Please, guide the conversation. We need somebody to anchor us.
It's early for two of us and late for one of us, so bear with us, listeners.
I have actually some questions about some of these items.
Oh, well, excellent. Well, do you want to start with a question, or...?
Yeah, okay, so we have a bunch of... Well, how about we go through the different things that we have, All right. That we're definitely doing.
Yes. So for starters, maybe the primary thing is to introduce Gremayre as a topic. I think that the actual dots on the sheet, people don't often take Gremayre, or if they do, they're kind of like, I'll need this at some point, probably.
Really?
I take it every single time. It's an amazing ability.
Oh.
When I run a game, it's like everybody takes Gremayre.
I might be projecting second edition onto it a bit, because I think second edition, it was maybe less broad spectrum.
Even then it was it was all over the place when I was...
No, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've always loved it. I've rarely found other people who did in games that I've been in. So
now Enigmas, no one ever took that.
Well, that's their loss.
I like Enigmas.
So yeah, just kind of expanding on that idea of what Gremayre, if you are taking dots in Gremayre, what's the story of that for your character? Did they sit down and study with a teacher? Did they find an eldritch tome somewhere in a dreaming realm? Like exploring those kinds of questions and how to translate those dots on the sheet into...
I can also think of it as the one option for your character. When you do past lives, those are like specific memories about your character that your character has about previous lives. I could see Gremayre, if your character sort of went through the Chrysalis with Gremayre, it could be just the non-personal memories, the sort of general stories that may not involve their character directly of their history that they remember from thousands of years.
Sort of like inherited cultural knowledge or tradition. Yeah, I could see that. So yeah, that's, I think, maybe the opening for the thing. But mainly the book is going to be system options and extra crunch and little bits that you can throw into a game.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody loves the crunch. I think the hard part is writing lore bits of it, except that's a lie because it's also actually very hard to write all of the mechanics for it, which we'll get to talk about. But I think from an audience perspective, it's easy to get invested in the crunch, and there's going to be a lot of that for players. But we also want to talk about these lore topics in ways that people find exciting and add something new to your game, much like you might have gotten from reading, say, the Book of Days.
Yeah. So can we get like a very brief description of each of the lore topics, and then we could like go into them in more detail? Or no, not topic, like topics that are covered in it, like...
Yeah.
I know we mentioned alternate cantrips, we mentioned sorceries, whatever those are. Like there's a bunch. What are those topics?
All right. So on this list that I have here, the first one is expanding on ways to use the arts, just the standard core cantrips that are in there, or unleashings, I suppose. But I think part of that is when you look at the cantrip descriptions for the first time, especially, it can be maybe easy to think that that's the limits of what it can do. It gives you some examples. I actually really like in C20 how each cantrip starts with a couple narrative examples of how it might be used in context. I think that was a major...
Hugely helpful.
Yeah.
Yep.
So just kind of thinking about, all right, well, so you have Soothsay 2, Seer's Wisp. What can you do with that beyond just find this thing that I need? What are the other potentials of that cantrip? You have Willow Whisper. What can you do with talking to things like plants or objects?
I'm so sad they changed Willow Whisper in C20. I loved it so much before. That's like it's one of the few cantrips I really miss. Anyway.
I had an idea for that.
Yeah, you directly talk to things, and now it's like you talk about things.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, they did a lot of subtle little changes like that, which, we'll get to that topic in a minute.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just kind of starting off by helping players become more comfortable with the arts, because similar to Mage the Ascension in a way, I think that you can very easily find yourself with like a couple dots in chicanery or whatever, and you just fall into the same patterns of using the cantrips the same ways. You know, you find, here's the tool that works for me, similar to a mage creating rotes. You're like, I'm just going to keep using it this way. And I think players should try and push those boundaries a little bit more structuredly. Like, yeah, you can always fall back on unleashings, but think about the potential of the actual cantrip that you have. It can be a lot more flexible. So don't just say, oh, well, I don't know how I'm going to use this cantrip to do this, so I'll just unleash. It's like, no, just sit with it.
I find myself... It's like I'm overly maybe not overly. I'm embracing the flexibility in a cantrip, specific cantrip, but I'm being inflexible by taking it too much with various characters. With Wayfair 1 Opscotch, just because it's like if my character's not a fighter, it's like a way to deal with fights with whatever problems you can just.
Sometimes the best defense is to get away.
Yeah, or make the other thing go away. There's lots of
that too.
Yeah.
I think it's also a great opportunity to expand upon some of the powers that might be less obvious how they get used. Like, naming one is something that I somehow wound up using all the time when I was playing one of my Puka characters.
That's on the list of cantrips I wish I had in real life. Like, really up there.
Read between the lines. Finally, I can understand other people.
Yeah, or just... go to a museum and be like, this was undeciphered text. Well, is it? Anyway.
I have weird linguist thoughts about that one. But
yeah.
Anyway. So, to your point, Josh, about alternate cantrips, that is something else that we will be looking at in this book. Because, yeah, they did some of the arts dirty, I must say.
Yeah. And there's just some arts that it's like, I can think of more than 5 cantrips that would fit really good under this. We need more. Yeah.
Could we get 2 or 3 examples? You know, I'm going to be the audience surrogate here. I haven't read all of the arts from the previous editions, so all I know is the C20 stuff, and all of it seems great. What am I missing out on that we might see coming back?
Mm-hmm.
Josh, would you like to talk about Primal 1?
Yeah, Primal 1 used to let you, and this is the one that I find most confusing because I find it actually would have fit great under C20. It used to let you talk to whatever the realm was for. So Primal, if you're using it with prop, you could talk to whatever object falls under that prop realm. If you're using nature, you could talk to natural things, including animals or plants or the weather. If you're using actor, you could talk to someone you don't have a language in common, or they're deaf or not able to talk, or they're asleep or whatever. You could use Fae 5 to talk to cantrips. That could have an interesting conversation. Talk to a freehold. Talk to parts of the dreaming. Talk to used to be able to use scene as a direct realm. That would be an interesting one.
You still can in Kith Book Nymphs.
Yeah, talking to time would be interesting. I don't know what that would do, but
and I don't know. I don't know if Old Willow Whisper actually spelled this out, but theoretically, if you're able to talk to a thing, you can then use things like subterfuge and manipulation to try and convince them to whatever.
Yep. Which, or at the very least, you can get information from things that are. But it had this like neat thing talking about how if you're talking to a rock, the rock will talk about things from a rock perspective.
Yes.
Meaning it's very like you would need a full write up for this, not just saying, because it's like the rock would. It doesn't think about time the way you do. It's been around for a very long time, probably, and just has a different pace of life than you. Talking to a fire would be sort of the other way around, and it just cares about different things.
But I love the mental image of talking to somebody's ego and saying, look, this upcoming fight, you might as well throw it. It's just not worth it. And then they wake up later on and like, why am I doing so bad in this fight?
Yeah.
Aww.
But you don't want to make it into mind control because it's like a level 1 art and it's already doing so much, but it can be convincing the way you would just socially convince a person. So
yeah. And you want to be careful not to step on the toes of other arts too much. Like, because then you run into the problem that you have in Mage where it's like Spirit can do anything. Entropy can do anything.
But it is kind of like Spirit in that you could maybe do a lot of things, but I don't think it would let you do what like Sovereign lets you command things
right,
to
no,
do
that's
stuff
what I mean.
that I don't think you could order a door open necessarily. But you could talk to the door. Maybe you could talk to a computer and could hack that way. Like it's a new interface for the computer. It's actually a good speech interface for a computer. Although that would be a lot like talking with an LLM, I guess, but not quite.
I mean, I'm excited so far. What else we got?
Well, I'm going to jump ahead a bit to a question that we got from a listener asking about Skycraft in particular, because interestingly, the art Skycraft does not contain any actual like weather control. You can make gusts of wind, you can make lightning bolts, you can make electric phenomena, but there's no like make rain, make fog, make storm. So that's something which I would like to bring back into that art because it always seemed like a notable gap.
Does Primal not already do that?
Primal lets you make pure elements. Whether or not the storyteller wants to allow expanding that into make a storm is up to them, but otherwise, no.
Yeah. And I do think it's okay for alternate cantrips to have some overlap with other alternate cantrips or things like that. That could.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're all optional, so.
Yeah.
That's one of my sort of like guiding design principles whenever creating homebrew content is that all new rules in particular should be optional and modular so that people can mix and match as they will. It should all hang together if somebody wants to use it all together, but if someone just says, I'm going to use this specific thing or these 2 or 3 specific things.
Yeah. But if you have like a level 4 cantrip that happens to have some significant overlap with a completely different level 1 cantrip of a different art, I don't see that as the end of the world.
Well, and hell, 2nd edition had arts where they said this is the same as Legerdemain 5, so there's precedent.
Keeping that in mind is a good way to approach this and hopefully any other supplement that has optional features. I have a friend of mine who's storytelling a game for the first time and is overwhelmed by the sheer number of options from the supplements. And I told him, you can just pick and choose the ones that you like, figure out how comfortable you are with the basic, and then expand from there.
Yeah.
So for folks who are wanting more out of Gremayre, this is a great chance to dig in and find the pieces that you love, but you don't need to worry about going through dozens of pages and having to know everything for it to all make sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to say one more
Go for
cantrip
it, yeah.
thing that I miss. I would love to see, like, for instance, the old augury from second edition, where the player describes things that will happen based on successes and realms used, and then that describes a scene that will happen at some point.
Ooh.
I think we might have actually had that as a ritual, a
Okay.
sorcery thing, which we'll get to shortly.
Okay. But yeah, that was just such a cool power. It's sad.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So there's also, okay, it is a time-honored tradition in homebrewing culture to, for Changeling in particular, create new kiths. I mean, there are probably thousands at this point, like out on the internet that people have created over
or
the years.
even just the official thing. There's hundreds. There's over 100.
Right, yeah.
Well over 100. Yeah.
But people also have created arts, and in my opinion, those tend to be much less interesting and robust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that is because the arts that we get really cover a lot. I mean, Mage gets away with just 9 spheres, right? And we're talking about how many permutations there can be for these seemingly limited cantrips.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's very little that you can't do already with the existing arts.
Yep.
That being said, we will be including an art construction kit for people who are so inclined, with some guidance around how to do that process, how to mechanize that process. We'll be having an example to work through. Maybe the actual cantrips for that sample art will appear in the book. I'm not sure yet, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Similar idea to the kiths. We're not going to have a point buy system to make an art.
No.
Oh gosh, can you imagine trying? That would make any sense at all. No, I've been excited to see what we have so far on the alternate cantrip instruction. It really comes down to just a lot of best practices on creativity. So, folks who are concerned about having to deal with a huge menu of options need not be. This would be a relatively breezy set of advice on how to make stuff that will nevertheless cover all the important bases.
Yeah. Just double check. Are we covering also, like, the rules for learning both cantrips?
Yes.
Whatever level.
Yeah. XP costs, etc.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, in terms of getting inspiration for doing these yourself, you can always turn to other games in the World of Darkness line. You can think about, like, scenarios that have come up in your game where it seemed like nothing was really a good fit for what you wanted to do. Like, draw inspiration from those moments and figure out how to transpose them into Changeling, with the caveat that you want to try and make sure there's really not already something that will get you where you need to be. Like, you may say, like, oh, I wish I could turn invisible. It's like, well, chicanery kind of has you covered.
Yeah, you don't want a fighting art.
I did make one of those once back in the day.
The fighting, like, Dragon's Ire was already a bit too close to that, in my opinion. But, like, you're just good at fighting art? No, that's not. Or a meta magic art? That would be, that's not.
Certainly, though, C20 covers a lot more than the previous editions did. I will say that. Like, it was much easier to make arts when you only had, like, 6 to work with.
Yeah.
So
6? I cannot imagine having only 6 arts.
They had more in supplements, but those were just like they did in the C20's player. Actually, those were from supplements, the ones in the C20's player guide. And those were also, like, a lot of those were like, I don't know, this feels very limited or very one note kind of things.
Yeah. And sometimes the books would get really, like when it said, oh, the Fae and their fabled healing magics, and it was like half of Primal 4 was the only healing cantrip in the game until C20. So
yeah. And actually,
like
they made healing harder in C20 in a way. But
yeah. So then we've got Kith sorceries.
So this is like, I have questions about kith sorceries. Like, I've been reading the stuff we've been doing. I still don't quite grok them. Like, I don't really get what this is about. So could we get, like, the elevator pitch for kith sorceries?
The elevator pitch for kith sorceries, and I think that I should have copied and pasted from when I posted this before. But the idea is that they are, I mean, in mage terms, they're really rotes, right? They're like specific applications of glamour towards a specific purpose through a ritualized framework. So it's not, you have to come up with a bunk, you have to decide on the spot how the art will combine with the realm. It's more structured and regularized than that within the culture of a given kith. So they are kith-specific sorceries. although still kind of on the fence about whether one can learn from another kiths.
And it's just kith specific, not like other, like the secret society has sorceries or something.
Yeah, I didn't want to get into all that, but I mean, potentially. Certainly there will be suggestions for how you can create your own, and if that's something people want to do. Because we do have to talk about, at some point in this book, the Crystal Circle, sorcerers par excellence.
Yes, I was very curious about how they would fit into things when we got into this, but I think the other important aspect of the kith sorceries is that so we have, from the narrative perspective, the kith sorceries are these rote things that the changelings have come to take mastery of. Mechanically, they cover edge cases with changeling magic, things that you don't normally feel would make sense as an art or an individual cantrip, because the power itself would be too powerful if it were allowed to be that way, or maybe just too niche to fit into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I could imagine there's ones where it's like, you might only ever do this once in your life. This doesn't need to be a cantrip.
Those level 5 sorceries. Structurally, they are 1 through 5, and I think we have 2 powers per level, so it does resemble other sort of ritual magic systems in other games, like thaumaturgy, etc., and relies on Gremayre as a knowledge. So, the other inspiration for this is me personally. When I was working on Kith Book Yildu many, many moons ago on Shadow and Essence, I had developed like Yildu rituals, and they were seasonal. So this was before seasonal arts existed, and there was like this fourfold system of, if your primary thing is autumn, here's how the power expresses itself. Actually, no, I take that back. It was an art in the old framework. So updating that into C20, Kith Book Selkie by Rachel Judd. I forget who actually. I think it was Rachel Judd.
It's Rachel.
Yeah. So she had done Selkie sorcery, and that was kind of like, that gave me inspiration for kind of doing the Yildu one.
Mm-hmm.
So that plus, why don't the Slua have necromancy yet? Those were like the 2 fundamental inspirations from my side, and then it grew into more stuff.
On my side, I had fun coming up with themes for each of them, giving the Boggins housekeeping, which plays into, the name itself is cute, but it covers everything from the cozy Seelie who just wants people to feel invigorated when they eat a meal at their home and safe to be there, down to the unseelie who has decided that you and your home belong to her, and nothing is going to take that away for better or worse. I had some fun with the Puka companionship ones. Like, it'd be easy to do something where we just lean into them being pranksters, and there is a bit of that, but for me, it was more fun getting into questions of how do Puka, which are all about associating with people and opening up, do that and manage that. So we've got little things like Cat Cafe, which lets you make a place that's comfortable and people can be around animals without worrying about them, and Puka can be a little bit more of their animal selves. All the way up to Second Chance, where you can literally let somebody kind of reincarnate and do minor reality rewrites to give themselves a second chance at life. I love it. I don't think it would fit very well under a cantrip, and I don't think you want to do that as an unleashing.
Well, see, the thing is, though, you're also pointing to another aspect of this, which is, yes, each of these is kind of unified by a theme, but they're not like general power buckets. They are expressions of bogginess, expressions of puka-ness in some fundamental way. And whether that's an extension of their birthright or an extension of some piece of their story, it does, I think, in each case, feel specific to that kith. So that was also kind of a big piece of the design.
For me, part of getting into talking about that was that, so I mentioned how with Puka exploring companionship over the obvious one, And I enjoyed making the Redcaps go heavy into anti-fascist stuff with their
Yay!
yeah,
Yeah.
just a bunch of sorceries about rebellion, which I think everybody is going to be very excited about.
Just a bunch of fae eating the rich.
Are you going to be tapping into some of the problematic elements that sometimes come up in that type of thing too?
Do you mean like the of like approaches to violence, or do you mean something else?
Yeah, like that. Like the not just violence, but like sometimes you have the this is wrong, I'm going to lash out against this authoritarian thing. And maybe sometimes those implications aren't so great when you take them to be like going forward. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, that was a balancing act because I think the Redcaps already have a lot of that built into just the
Yeah.
inherent aspect of how they're treated in the fiction and even what their frailty is. And I wanted to focus more upon the relatively positive aspect of it. For example, I explicitly their rebellion sorcery cannot be used to punch down. Like if you are a
Oh no, yeah.
if you're a red cap count, you can't use it to go after some poor commoners and do terrible
Oh no,
things
I
to
wouldn't
them.
think that would be good. Yeah. You don't want to be a Stalin with it. Yeah.
That said, you are correct in thinking that a red cap who is not thinking wisely about the consequences of their actions may, in a game, use these abilities to upset people on the top level and then do something that they cannot take back.
Yeah.
A lot of these are very powerful statements that they can make, and so a wise redcap mentor in these powers might be careful about who they teach them to. And personally, I like to think that in any good changeling game, if your character is abusing these, then a Corby is going to show up and kick your butt.
Yep.
If you want to make a villainous redcap who's just rebelling against any authority, though, nothing stops you from making that as a character.
Can we talk about another potentially problematic thing on the list?
Oh boy. Okay, let's go for it.
So, fae have never in the game really had any direct connection to the infernal. I think when we talked about the demon, the fallen perspective on Changeling, along with Hunter and Mummy, the demon, the totality of what demon the fallen has to say about the fae is this. So that seems like another gap in the
Yeah.
mix. So yes, there will be fae infernalism, not in any kind of edgelordy way. I would say. I think we're trying to avoid that.
Are we doing the tithe to hell for Arcadia and Dreams of Nightmares?
Well, so that's because that is a major piece of the fae lore. There
Yeah.
is the traditional narratives of like, are they the angels who didn't fight on either side in the war for heaven? That question. Some of that's coming in from Changeling the Lost. Some of that's just kind of coming in from standard folklore. But really, the more important question is like, how and why would a fae choose to go down that path or find themselves on that path? Like, there will be crunch in terms of having the demonic investments that infernalists always seem to stack up. But more importantly is like, what is the relationship between the dreaming and the abyss, essentially, and the agents thereof?
Now, could you give me an example of that? One of the things that I'm sure the audience would be curious about is how this is going to fit into the canon of the setting. Given that, one, it's optional, and two, World of Darkness has a long history of firmly establishing what things are. If it says in the book that the Tuatha and the Fomorians fought a war, then so they did.
Yeah. I will say from the start, not having played Demon the Fallen, I have zero idea how things like the faith trait will factor into this, so I might have to turn to somebody else for advice on how to make that work.
Yeah.
But within the context of the setting, like, to me it seems very basic. The changelings, and the changelings in particular, are on Earth in human bodies, and infernal beings take advantage of anyone and everyone that they can. So if there is a fae who is tempted by whatever circumstance to seek power or seek revenge or whatever, and there's this demonic whatever that is able to provide it, that's the basis for some kind of pact that will ultimately be a net negative for the changeling in question. Like, that is the ultimate point, is this is always a bad idea. Some of them choose to do it anyway.
So we'll be talking about what might drive a changeling to do that. And I imagine there's going to be some interesting consequences, because while I think the World of Darkness generally leaves the question of what happens to a mortal soul to be in question, like an open question, that with the Fey Souls, we know that they reincarnate. So I would guess that if I made a pact with a demon in one incarnation, then whatever my next incarnation is, they're stuck with whatever piece of soul may have got bought off, would be my concern.
Depends how big the pact is.
Ooh.
But yeah, this is also something that, because we just recorded our episode on Dauntain PCs, so that idea of the brand, like, is this a new brand, like, to have made a pact with some kind of demon and now you're stuck with it through some number of incarnations. I know that we discussed in that episode that maybe C20 Dauntain is not the way we want to go, Josh and I, but yeah, but like, one of the investments, for example, like, they don't have to be these major things. One of them on the list is avoid a banality trigger. So just one of the banality triggers you no longer have to worry about. What is a changeling willing to pay or do to have that advantage? So that kind of question.
Gosh.
It is interesting because a demon, the way it presents, it does not seem like changelings would be able to enter into pacts in the way that pacts work in Demon the Fallen.
Well, see, I have no idea how they work in Demon the Fallen, so I'm just winging it here.
yeah, but that would be...
And yeah. The advantage of doing this in C20 is that there is no Demon 20 to compare with.
I know.
I'm just really thinking now, what would you give to be able to be yourself whenever you like to the mortals in your life? What would you give to be able to take them with you into your next incarnation rather than worrying about leaving them behind?
Oh, that's got real nasty implications too on that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Maybe we could talk about the last thing on this list, which is counterweaving and cantrip dueling.
Yay! I just wrote up about this.
Hey.
So tell me, what was the reason that you wanted to have this written?
Well, so one of the primary uses of Gremayre as a knowledge in 2nd edition was to counter cantrips. Like, just say, nope, I'm going to use my Gremayre and try and combat that cantrip. That has been removed from C20. I think when we talked to Ian Lemke about it, and he said, or maybe it was Charlie Kentrell, I can't remember who, but somebody said, well, now we want to focus more on just using cantrips against cantrips, because now that you can buy up your realms, if you don't have Fey 5, you just spend an extra glamour and you have it for whatever you want to do. And so now, rather than just puncturing a cantrip, now it's like, I hopscotch that cantrip. I don't know, I chicanery that cantrip, whatever. And that's all well and good, but I still feel like there should just be some kind of basic counter magic, because at least in Mage, other supernaturals have that. They just say, nope, I'm resisting this magical effect. So introducing that back into the game was part of it. But then the dueling thing was just kind of expanding on that I hopscotch your cantrip idea.
I love the idea of making changeling combat encounters or wizard duels more exciting. So if I may, I'll explain the basics of what we've got here. So I divided counterweaving into several categories. We have reactive counterweaving, active counterweaving, and a few other tricks that changelings can do in order to stop that nasty spell from ending their day on a bad note. Reactive counterweaving is just a new defensive maneuver. It's the same as doing dodge, parry, or blocking. You'll be rolling a dice pool. If you know that somebody is going to be using a cantrip on you, you can declare the reactive counterweaving defensive maneuver and then roll that to remove successes from their pool, thus weakening or possibly removing the effect completely. And just like with any other defensive maneuver, you can abort to this. So if you're using reverse declarative initiative, which I love, and you declare first that you're going to shoot somebody, and they go, I'm going to hopscotch you 100 feet into the air and just leave it at that, then you can abort your action to, I'm going to try to stop that.
Yes.
Active counter weaving is when you are doing what C20 wanted to go for, which is you're going to target the spell itself and do some magic to play around with it. So, for example, using hopscotch to redirect a target to somebody else, or commanding a lightning bolt with protocol to not do anything to you whatsoever, or even just using mooch to steal the benefits of somebody else's cantrip for yourself. Maybe you want to have those dragon scales. And if they don't like it, well, they have to decide to either put up with it or abort their own action to stop casting the spell before something even worse happens to them.
I just thought of a random weird thing that would be fun, which is if you redirect somebody's Soothsay Seer's Wisp and then throw a time realm on it, and it's like, now every time you use it for the next X times, it'll just find you the nearest, like, coconut cream pie, regardless of what you're searching for.
I did have one where you used Terror the Long Night to make a Seer's Wisp flee in terror of the thing that it is supposed to be hunting down. I know, don't you feel bad for the Wisp?
Poor little Wisp.
The other tricks you can do, the first couple are things which you could technically already do in the book, but which are not really covered. One is a reminder, you can always invoke the autumn, though I do expand upon how you might do that in combat, and talk a little bit about what other changelings might think about you doing that. Using dodge to avoid things like the changing who goes, I didn't ask how big the room is, I said I cast pyretics. And foil bunk, which I guess I'm going to be subdividing this into two pieces. One, which is, look, if you're going first in initiative and you see that somebody going after you is, let's say, bouncing a ball because they're about to do some wayfare to hopscotch away, you could use your action to just say, I snagged the ball, foiling their bunk, and now they've got to do it at whatever normal difficulty they were going to be doing it at. But I do reintroduce the idea of being able to use Gremayre to baffle something, which is rolling manipulation plus Gremayre to do your own counter bunk or ruin their concentration or otherwise invoke the dreaming to mess with somebody. And that will increase the difficulty of their spellcasting roll. So hopefully they have a really good bunk to avoid having to roll at a high difficulty and risk botching.
Hopefully. But hope is not something one should live on.
Honestly, we really just hope to see the storyteller roll the ones on their cantrips.
Yeah. So anyway, hopefully people will enjoy all of those systems and stuff. And there's a couple wish list items too. Like, I know that I want to... I wrote up some like glamour resonance rules for the Emperor's New Coat, which I would like to work into this, and synergy rules for multiple Fae casting a cantrip together and how that could work. Those are like the two primary things on my list. But there's also things like the Unleashing system in the player's guide with imprint and everything was the most confusing piece of mechanics to ever come out the door. No, I take that back. First edition's Trod background was even worse, but not by much. So,
yeah.
And I would say the book is, I'm going to say like 50% of the way there. Is that too optimistic?
Of the rough draft?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have some time, and by the time this episode drops, maybe we'll be at like 60 or 70%. So, we do want to hear what people are interested in within the realm of possibility, because as you said, Josh, scope creep is a thing, and trying to contain this is going to be difficult because there is so much that we could talk about.
And I think aiming at things I think the best thing would, like, if you're going to make suggestions, My suggestion is look for things that are already talked about in Changeling, but not actually given enough flesh to use, as opposed to like, this would be really cool, but it's not already there kind of thing at all.
Yeah. And there are things which, I mean, hopefully there will be other books for the 30th anniversary project coming out. No, I'm not going to say hopefully. There will be. Maybe not as many as originally planned, but there will be others. And some of them, like the Changeling Way, will have other kind of corners of the setting to explore. So
yeah, like you might make a suggestion, and then it just turns into somebody else making a book on your suggestion instead of it showing up in this book. Yeah,
we do have a couple suggestions already, as it turns out.
Yeah,
I look forward to talking about those suggestions right now. When I saw that, I joked about how we would have to double the length of the book to accommodate everything that people were asking about whether it would be included.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of it is kind of already at least being considered. Let's go through these questions and see what's what. So,
okay. Do you want to go through all of them, or just the ones we haven't already answered?
we can go through all of them. They're short.
Yeah. Nicholas asks, which kiths get sorceries specific to them?
That will be the core 13 from Changeling the 20th core book. Separate ones for the two groups of she.
Luna asks, is chimerical tech covered in the book, or more technology-focused powers for a modern-day game?
So, pointing to other books in the line, I think we kind of decided this was not planned in the outline. Starting it now would be such a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
So this will probably be the centerpiece of the Knocker chapter for Lore of the Kiths, which is coming further down the line.
Yeah. Another thing that it's not in here, but it's sort of it's related is the fact that we don't actually get rules for what a chimerical item does for different level. Like there's no guidelines or anything. That I know. I found that frustrating, and other players have too. Storytellers have, and players too. Anyway, that is on our mind. No promises though. Chigsa asks, if there are plans for kith-specific arts, how will they be made more useful than previous entries, Tailcraft and Infusion?
I mean, there are no plans for kith-specific arts. There are plans for kith-specific sorceries, and I think they're more useful. I don't know. Generally speaking.
We could always just come up with 5 new alternate cantrips for each for Tailcraft and Infusion.
Ouch.
But anyway.
I like Tailcraft. I think Tailcraft's okay.
I like Tailcraft too.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about level 2, but
yeah. Whirling asks, does it have a system for spontaneous or rarely willed chimerical creation aside from onomancy and confusion? The C20 describes as changeling stilling with the potential to do it.
So this, I will say, is the one thing that maybe has crept onto the outline from these suggestions, because this is what you were pointing to, something that is said in the book, oh, this kind of exists, and then there's no,
also in
system.
that novel for C20.
Right, yeah.
Does it a bunch.
Yeah.
But if we do want to, I think we could look at Exalted the Fairfolk First Edition. If we could. Wanting. Not the whole system there, but the basic shaping idea might help.
Yeah.
On that.
So yeah, that might end up.
Yeah. Seb 3.0 asks, are there actual systems for Ornero pumping? Like entering mortal drees and doing stuff in there beyond the Oneromancy art?
I'd say that would probably be under other ways to use Oneromancy, creative ways to use it.
Yeah. I mean, it could also be potentially, doesn't have to be in this book or any of our books, but there is talk about how you can come across sleeping dreamers while in the near dreaming, and then maybe you could interact with their dreams that way without using an Oneromancy. But it definitely wouldn't be as useful in a way, or it'd be harder to do without an Oneromancy.
I have so many thoughts on wanting to play around with expanding a neuromancy and dealing with how the mortal dreamscape would interact with other things and how you would do that.
That's one of I had my own storyteller vault project, and that one's stalled purely because I keep coming up with systems and it makes it they're not good.
Scope create.
And I checked with Metafix, I'm like, this is not good, but how do I make this thread this needle? I can't figure it out. That one's hard.
The other thing I have to say is that there have been murmurs of a dreaming book in the works from Radio Free Arcadia for a while. I don't know if that's still in progress or not, but from my side at least, I've been trying to be a little bit hands off with some of the more with the crunchier dreaming stuff, under the expectation that that's something they're working on. So
Seb 3.0 asks, will we finally learn the secrets behind the Triumph Cask of Sorrows?
No.
I thought the secret was the Triumph Cask of Sorrows is the friends you make along the way.
Aw. Or the MacGuffin you make along the way.
Yeah.
No, because this is supposed to be kind of a reawakening of Book of Glamour, not of Keys to the Kingdom, the metaplot book. So
Yeah, we're not that. I don't even know how to approach that one. I wouldn't have. And then I still to ask without the question mark: is the book up for peer review testing?
Not yet.
Not yet.
It may be. Actually, it probably will be for patrons of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Give people a chance to give some feedback before it goes into final release.
Ideally. But yeah, we hope that people will stay interested in the topic and look forward to it with bated breath, which is now an alternate cantrip for, I don't know, Chicanery 3.
Yeah. Anyway,
we appreciate you all sitting in on our hour-long naming bunk. The -5 we'll get from this will be very helpful.
Yep.
Unless, of course, you use the level 1 issue sorcery that allows you to undo that benefit.
Mm-hmm.
You jerk.
Okay, so if people want to send in those ideas, they can do so. They can email us, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. They can join our Discord, discord.me/CTP. I guess you could leave a comment at changelingthepodcast.com on this episode, but I don't always see those very easily. Same as, I guess you could leave a comment on their YouTube channel for Changeling the Podcast. Definitely could reach us out to us on Patreon, and even better if you can support us, help keep everything going for Changeling the Podcast there. And you can always send us a toot for changelingpod@dice.camp.
Links to all of which will be in the show notes to this episode.
And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain the sorcerer known as Puka.
And I am the Magus in training Fetch.
And remember, an alternative cantrip to goodbye is the cold open.
The old Gremayre, it ain't what it used to be. Scope creep and nervosa are only one of the many dangers that homebrew writers have to contend with when creating content for Changeling the Dreaming. Variations on Skycraft 2's electric gremlins lead to typographical errors and missing drafts that you swore you saved on the external hard drive. Saboteur Dantain, wielding that cursed and banal treasure known as the Project Management Triangle, are ever on the lookout for a text they can derail. And who among us has not confronted the banality trigger of the officially sanctioned layout templates? Still, we believe in the power of glamour and the beauty of ideas, so we're pressing on to get this book complete, and we hope that it will be edifying and exhilarating for you who might read it. Do stop by our Discord at www.discord.me/CTP, where we will be soliciting suggestions and fielding questions as the draft nears its final stages. And in our knocker-like quest for perfection, or at least satisfaction, we are as ever grateful for the support of our patrons, who include Bad Company, Derek, Dorcadus, Ellerus, Hugo the Bogperson, Ia Bull, Jason Vines, Oreo, Razcaboose, Sandshaker, Sija, and Simon Strand. Many thanks, and eventually a copy of the book to them. If you too would like to help keep our podcast and associated projects going, please consider signing up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. You are also welcome to leave a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, or you could just tell your favorite people about our show. Thanks for listening, have your cantrips at the ready, and may your Gremayre always lead you back to the silver path as you keep on dreaming.